Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about working with wire in jewellery making. And one of the key parts of working with wire is preparing your wire to be made into beautiful jewellery or components for working in jewellery. Now there are two main things that I like to do with my wire before I get stuck in, and that's to either make it slightly harder or to warm it through and to make it nice and fluid. In this mini tutorial I'm going to show you how to harden your wire to make it just a little bit firmer. So there are a number of tools that I would use to make my wire harder. Now sometimes you will want to do this after you've created a shape, so let's just make a basic shape together now. Let's say I wanted to have a quite angular little shape going on as part of my wire. So I'm just going to make a very funny little spiral. There's kind of square corners to it. Now let's say this is the shape I want to keep in the wire. As it stands, with my 18 gauge round silver colour copper wire, that's not going to hold up to any movement in the piece of jewellery. That's going to catch and bend out of shape really easily. So one of the things that we can do to work harden this is to use a hammer. Now this is my favourite hammer of all time. It's a £1/4 brass head with a very ergonomic slim wooden handle. And all we're going to do is to tap that directly from above. When work hardening wire in this form, we need to have a safe background. So in this case I've got a miniature block. This is a stainless steel block. It's nice and solid, but it's a mini one. The second thing that we need to take into consideration is to hold the shape carefully. For one thing, we don't want to smash our fingers. For another thing, when you're hammering wire from above to set a shape, what can sometimes happen is that the design will open in a way you don't want it to open. So I would support that in as many places as I could safely access. Whilst I repeatedly tap straight down onto that wire to set that shape permanently into the form that we've asked it to sit in. So I'm just going to hold that very firmly. And remove my hammer, take away the block, and what we have now is a shape that is very much more set into position. For instance, you could wire on some small beads and have a lovely pair of geometric earrings or a singular pendant. Now this is a type of work hardening that we do after a shape has been formed. I'm just going to trim away a section of wire now. Let's say that what we wanted to do was to work with wire that was already slightly harder than the size we've been given. For instance, I will use a 20 gauge wire to make earring findings, as that fits through most ear piercings, most lobe piercings anyway. 20 gauge is equivalent to 0.8 millimeters. If I want that to be harder, but I don't want to hammer it before I form the shape, I can use a set of nylon jaw pliers to make that harder. And the way I would do this is use one of my other pliers to hold one end, like so, firmly grip that, and then I would run those nylon jaw pliers repeatedly over the length of that wire I would like to be harder. What I'm doing here is I am work hardening, but I'm not changing the shape, and I'm still allowing that to be fluid. So if I put my tools down and show you now, there's much more rigidity to the piece of wire. I've work hardened it, but I haven't altered the shape in any way. When we hammered, we are altering the shape. We're taking this from a perfectly round wire into a much more squished form. Now, the section on the block that we hammered a moment ago will also have hammer imprints on it. So that's something to consider, whether you want to have hammer imprints or whether you want it to be completely smooth. A third option is to use the wonderful wire straightening tool. Now there are two ways to use this. The way in which it was designed, so I'm going to pop this piece of wire down there into the middle, and I'm going to wrap both of the other two sides up over the top so that I'm grasping the central section of the wire in between all three of those cores. I'm then going to press across those two lower cores and pull that wire all the way through, and I can repeat this if I want to. What is happening here, opening and closing as I go, is I'm adding rigidity to the wire. Again, there's no change in the surface or the shape. It is still a beautiful round piece of wire, very, very smooth without any nicks or marks. Now, I found an alternative way to harden wire using this tool. It's not the way it was designed at all, but it's how I sometimes will use it. So we have 3 cores. I'm going to make that into a little mountain shape. I'm going to put the wire through so that the wire sits above the 2 lower ones and below the upper. And then I'm going to flatten that. Grip hold of one end and draw that wire all the way through. Now, if I need my wire to be incredibly strong, that's what I will do. It gives just an extra punch to the strength of that wire. So that's a couple of different ways that you can take the strength of a particular size or gauge of wire, as it is known, and make it act much more strongly than its gauge will normally allow.